So I'd like to welcome everybody to this is my bleep bleep country, bad language and good living in the UK. And I'd like to wish everybody a happy Dasai. Today is a big day, not just because we're doing this panel, but because Nepalis across the world are marking the celebration of the victory of good over evil by traipsing over to their relatives, getting their blessings, and making merry. And because I happen to be in Wales in the UK, I'm not quite part of that, but I'm happy to be here celebrating language, so to speak. So thanks to the National Centre for Writing for hosting this panel under the Visible Communities program. And today we're going to be talking about language and how language has affected how Nepali origin individuals and communities live life in the UK. So how does this vary across generations, across genders? How is this mixed up with cultural or artistic expression? And specifically, this Meet the World panel is exploring the experiences of Nepali Gurkhas living in the UK to understand how using a language or being unable to use a language affects their lives in this, kind of difficult multicultural reality of Britain today. So I'd like to welcome and introduce our panelists for today. We have Sanjay Sharma, who has recently completed a PhD in sociology from the National University of Singapore, and his thesis was titled Patriarchy on the Move, Transnational Experiences of Gurkha Women. And he also runs the Instagram and Facebook pages, Gurkha Women. And we also have with us Premila van Ommen, a researcher on Gurkha youth experiences in the UK, as well as an activist for Gurkha rights. And we have Mukahang Limbu as well, who's a poet, whose debut poetry collection, Mother of Flip-Flops, was published by Outspoken Press last year, 2022. And he's a 3-time Foyle Young Poet. So I'd like to welcome all three of you here. Great to have you, and look forward to our chat today. So Premila will be talking to the role of rap and hip-hop in the youth culture of British Nepali youth. Mukahang will be talking about he and other Nepali youth hopefully are using poetry and prose to express their lives in the UK, and Sanjay will be telling us a little bit more about how he's used oral history methodologies to record the often hidden lives of Gurkha housewives and Gurkha women in general. So before we actually start, welcome to the audience as well. There is an opportunity throughout to ask questions. If you have any questions for our panelists, then please type them into the Q&A box. And we will address these questions as we go along and at the end, depending on how many we get. So please feel free to type in your questions, and we will deal with them in due course. Before we go to the panelists, I'll take this opportunity to give you a bit of context on the Nepali diaspora, particularly the Nepali Gurkha diaspora in the UK. So some of you may not know that only about 1% or less than 1% of Nepalis in the UK were here before 1981. The 2001 UK census recorded only about 6,000 Nepali-born people in the UK. About 10 years later, this had already shot up to about 50,000. And today, the Nepali embassy in the UK claims that there are about 150,000 Nepalis living in the UK, which probably includes Nepal-born as well as UK-born Nepali origin individuals. So that's a huge rise. That's in the Nepali diaspora, and about 2/3 of this diaspora is made up of Gurkha soldiers, veterans, and their families, and they're based mostly in the southeast of England, and army bases scattered all across the UK, including Wales, where I am. So there are obviously some key factors behind this massive rise in the Nepali diaspora in the UK, particularly the Nepali Gurkha diaspora, and it relates basically to UK government. The UK government, until 2004, Gurkhas who had served in the British Army were not allowed to settle in the United Kingdom. Thereafter, they were allowed to settle in the United Kingdom with their families if they had served in the British Army after 1997, which is the date at which the Gurkha Brigade headquarters moved from Hong Kong to the UK. And after a huge campaign in the UK, a highly publicized campaign. Gurkha soldiers and their families who had served before 1987, were also allowed to settle in the UK. So basically, most Nepalis who came to the UK have settled here, between 2004 and 2011 is my guess. Premila, Mukahang, Sanjay, you can correct me if I've got things wrong. So we have a huge Nepali diaspora in the UK, and they're very active. By an approximate count, there's probably about 500 organizations, Nepal-based organizations in the UK at this current time. And some of them are religious, some of them are ethnic, some of them are based on the region in Nepal these Nepalis have come from, and all sorts. And some of them are professional. And we're not actually going to be, going over what these organizations do in the UK, because that would take, more than one session. But we're going to kind of look into how various subcultures, subcommunities within the Nepali diaspora in the UK kind of get by in the UK, how they live life, how they express themselves. And in particular, we're going to be looking at language and the role of language. So, how important is Nepali as a language to being Nepali in Britain, to being British Nepali? How important are the other languages that certain ethnic groups that make up the Gurkha recruitment speak, such as Gurung, Tamang, Limbu, Magar, and Rai? How important is English to their lives? If not everybody, particularly the Gurkha housewives, not everybody speaks English to the same level as the rest of their family. And indeed, in Wales we have Gurkha children who are learning Welsh at the moment. So how do their lives translate through language? What do they lose of their home cultures, and what do they gain from the host culture in the UK? So we're going to be kind of ranging across quite a broad set of groups, and our panelists will help us kind of navigate this kind of contentious terrain. So I'm going to start with Sanjay. Welcome, Sanjay. Just to begin with the basics of how language can, help or hinder survival in a new place. We're going to start with the real basics, and then we're going to go on to artistic and cultural expression. So, Sanjay, we know that Gurkha men who served in the British Army would have picked up English to varying degrees, depending on when they served, where they were posted, and so on, and where they retired. But as a broad generalization, it may be safe to assume that what served them in the army would have been sufficient for life in the UK. And many of them would have retired after 15 years or so. They might have retired when they were still relatively young or just in middle age. So their command of the English language may have been sufficient for them to embark on a second career in the UK. But what about their wives? So obviously there's a difference between the Gurkha women, Nepali Gurkha women who served as midwives, who served in the army increasingly. But maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of who this group is that you cover in your Instagram and Facebook pages, the hidden Gurkha women, and how they have survived or faced challenges as regards language. So over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And so all the information that I share today is based primarily, as you already said, the oral history reviews that I did, primarily with the older generation of Gurkha women, mostly in their 60s, 70s, 80s. I talked to a lot of those women primarily during the lockdown, online, as you. So when we talk about Gurkha women, it's a general understanding that it is mostly the wives of the Gurkha soldiers, which is largely true. But there were also women who were part of the British Army itself. For instance, the QAs, who were nurses. For instance, Radha Rawat was a major in the British Army. She was a QA, a nurse, and she served in various countries with the Gurkhas and beyond. Right. So what I'm trying to say is, while there is a big chunk of our population that is Gurkha whites, but there is also another group of population that is often ignored and overshadowed, which is the population of the professionals. But let me begin with an anecdote about the role of language when it comes to the Gurkha language, especially Gurkha whites. What happened is 1971 Hong Kong, a woman from Taskin in Nepal went to Hong Kong. That was her first overseas trip, and then she was living in Hong Kong barrack, and then her husband was out for his day duty, and then an inspection visit came in. The inspection visit was accompanied by the major, Gurkha major, and a few white British soldiers. And then the Gurkha major noticed that the woman, Indra Guru, had kept chicken in her potter, and then the major said, "You cannot have chicken in the potter." And then what Indra Guru said is "Tom Tom Dai," which is in Guru language, "Okay Dai." But then when her husband came back later that evening, he said, "Why did you speak in Guru language? You should never speak in Guru language in barrack. You should speak in Nepali." That is how language was policed in the yesteryears. It is being policed nowadays as well. For instance, the focus on English, primarily because most of the people, the Gurkhas, are now based in the UK, so English is their primary language. They have to learn English one way or the other to sustain their lives in the UK. But they have had rough histories learning one particular language because they belong to one particular language group, but they were forced to learn a different language in the yesteryears. And it continues in a different state now. So when I see this, I'm talking about the older generation of Gurkha women. There are younger generation of Gurkha women who are able to switch between English and Nepali, or English, Hindi, and other languages with ease. But these group of older women who were primarily uneducated, were not received formal education, have to struggle a lot when it came to their life in the UK. Also, just a bit of what the Gurkha women's history in the UK looked like. It was in the mid 1950s that the first group of Nepali women, Gurkha women, came to the UK. As I mentioned earlier, it was Radha Raut and Bimala Deva who started their journey from Nepal via Malaysia and Singapore to the UK. They went there as nurses, and a lot of other nurses followed Radha Raut and Bimala Deva. Then in the early 1960s, there were women who came with their husbands in the Buckingham Palace, where the husbands were guards. The women lived in the vicinity of the Buckingham Palace. And then later in 1962, there were 1,700 Gurkhas stationed in the UK. However, there are only 96 quarters available, which means there are only 96 families allowed out of those 1,700 Gurkhas. Those 96 families and the others lived mainly in Lionham in Wiltshire. That is where the army base was there. And then, as Robbie earlier mentioned, after 2004, 2007, a lot of Gurkhas went into the UK after winning the court orders of the residency and citizenship rights. I just think that is what I have to share now for the movement and the language-related history of Gurkha women.
Great, thanks, Sanjay. That's great. Give us a kind of an overview of what older generations, older women, the difficulties they may have faced and probably continue to face in the UK. So just to kind of leapfrog over to the younger generation, I'd like to go to Premila. I'd like to ask you about how younger people, like the kids of these women, or in some cases even the grandkids, with Nepali and or Gurkha affiliations, how are they, through the medium of, say, hip hop, how have they managed to kind of express themselves in their day-to-day lives in the UK, through a talent in using language? Say, if you're a rap artist, how is language setting them free? And what languages are we talking about exactly? Can you give us a kind of a sense of this subculture as practiced by young Gurkhas in the UK today?
Hello. Yes. In terms of the different languages that the youth are navigating, you could call them different dialects of English. Most of the youth, they are based around the south of the UK, so it's a very much southeast, south English accent. So you don't really hear much rap in, say, Scottish or northern accents, and not just with the Nepalese youth in the UK, but basically all spectrums of different migrant youth and British youth in general. The music that they tend to follow that becomes popular is British urban music. And so they use the language, which is often kind of a mixture of what they call roadman dialect. And so roadman dialect, it co-ops a lot of Jamaican patois. So it kind of has its roots in Jamaican patois language. And then they mix that with South London slang, and together that sort of formed this roadman dialect. And that's the most prevalent language that the youth are using in their music. Then there are others who are maybe not, it's a generational thing. So there are some youth who are much better in just rapping in pure Nepali. And then there are those who will mix a mixture, they will mix Nepali and English together. Often it's a mixture. And what I've noticed with the youth in terms of their language proficiency, it depends on what age they came and entered the UK. So then that shows how, good their grasp of English or Nepali is. And those who are younger find it more difficult to be very proficient in Nepali.
Great, thanks, Premila. I think with these, as with many other things, it's very difficult to get a sense. Sense of what exactly you mean when you talk about a mix of languages and this and that. I think it's probably a good idea for us to play this very interesting clip that you've made up for us. Let's have a look at that.
Like I ain't got a name, like I ain't got identity. Making assumptions like every Asian is akin to me. First it was mental abuse, now it's physically pretend to be civil and closed doors, they belittle me. It'd take more than a word to get rid of me. My people been known to hustle hard, that's traditionally. Kick me a couple times, I come back to bigger me. Sick of my skin color, I'm sick of your bigotry.
कोही नेपको राजा कोही नेपको रानी कोही नेपको चालक कोही फेरि खलासी कोही नेपको लाउरे कोही सुपरस्टार कोही बाटो खर्ने इन्जिनियर गडफादर
Drip drip slow that might be ice cold chopping with cutting up blow 100 a bag in his soul.
You know talk to police, that's why I've been brought up since a kid. Never back down from the fight with Nepali or Gurkha-li.
Gurkha's dead.
Taylor about the fucking flags.
My vision is blurry. I told mama I'm sorry. To the people that care for me, people that love me, tell them don't worry. Hey, if it's beef, we in H-Town. T-Dubs, we ain't fucking around. Gurkha riders, GRE, yeah they wanna hear that sound.
Feeling lot of stress lately.
Stress lately, stress lately.
Smoking on that Ami got me stress free.
That loud.
Blow like I'm gonna keep Tomuji doing it. Gopuri go, Korayo ko, Gaigode go. Gopata gauna audaina bane, briskily sikaune cha.
Go, come look at this crocodile. Solve people like my Gurkhas, baby. Look, can't wait my zoot so loud. Come and give you 1, 2 blowbacks. 5 man in a 3-door with 4-5 broski with daylight lurking. 20 on my back for wooden attack. Take shots from him like Percy.
We gon' have a big smell like gasoline. I've been on my house, I feel like masterpiece. Last I got no breaks, I hear the guys leave. Oh no, Lily no beefy.
Welcome, break ma. Yo, Wagwan talk until I from Rugiate ma. When I'm back in the trap, dropping on it. You know how shot, cause infinite.
So I know you got told by them waste man things. Snapchatting to your friends about them waste man things. Are they artists? Wanna see if I'm on time for you. Girl, your body make me die for you. Why you question when I write for you? Say you love me, then you pre me, don't you? Say you want me, but you pre on what I do. Girl, your body so good, I don't want to put you in the place that make you feel no good,
Thanks so much, Premila, for putting that together, because yeah, it's really beyond entertaining. Yeah, and it sent me down several rabbit holes of so-called research. I'd be playing these Gurkhali grind things, and my wife would come in and be like, yeah, I'm working. This is part of my work. So yeah, it's really quite incredible the range you can find, and you can just look this up on go through YouTube and come across all sorts of things that you can't really make out what's from, not easily at least for me, what's from Nepal and what's from, in some cases, what's from the UK. And yeah, there was one particular, so yeah, in this clip, there's some very obvious, there's some songs which are very obviously speaking about the racism faced by Nepalis, those of Gurkhali origin might being equated with Southeast Asians and subjected to that genre of racism. There's clips in there where they're talking about their elders, maybe not something that you get in mainstream hip hop. There's even references to children's alphabet rhymes, and of course there's lots of reference to the so-called Gurkha bravery, which we might talk about later if we have a bit of time. Now, one clip that wasn't included, that was part of my research, as this rapper called Gole, who I believe is based in the UK. And he says, Maya garchu harek bhasha ra sanskriti, mero lingo buzdaina hasta kititi, man mero Nepali tara bideshma bidesi ani swadeshma bidesi. So he's essentially saying, I love all languages and cultures, but they don't understand what I'm saying. They don't understand my lingo. They're laughing at me. So my heart is Nepali, but I'm a foreigner in a foreign land, and I'm a foreigner in my own land, by which he means Nepal. So there's a very keen sense of kind of resentment, regret going on there, which I find very interesting, because this particular rapper, to my mind, he speaks Nepali fine, just perfectly, but I mean he still feels like he's a foreigner when he goes to Nepal. So yeah, and then there's as you could probably make out from the clip there, there's other young people who are talking about, maybe you might watch a clip and not really make out that it's anything to do with Nepal, and suddenly there would be a reference to YY in the middle of a song. So there, something that most Nepalis can relate to, this particular brand of instant noodles, which is kind of ubiquitous in Nepali diasporas across the world. So yeah, it's really interesting, and yeah, I'd like to just kind of move over to Mukahang now. Thanks for being patient. How does what Premila was talking about and what we saw in the clip, how do you relate to this, to your own experience of writing poetry, say mostly in English or in English, and the use of language to kind of express yourselves, or mixing up languages? How do you relate to this in general?
Yes, so I think one thing that was really stood out to me, and as Premila really aptly put, is the use of slang, especially sort of the amalgamation of patois, and because I grew up with that road talk, I grew up with in that south east Oxford kind of sort of community where sort of the Nepali youth were using that kind of slang. I particularly didn't feel comfortable using that kind of slang, just because I was meant to be sort of a good boy, I was reading books, and it was kind of felt like that appropriation of language, but I felt it was a way for them to fit in, that didn't, my way of fitting in was excelling in academics, versus like, you know, other like people who like want to fit in with sort of like, oh, you know what, like the common speak is, what, you know, lingua franca is. But I think what that like translates into is really interesting, especially in the genre of music they create, is also like, that's also not just kind of like, you know, like grime, but it's also like Afrobeats, you know, and there's like a various like genres of like, that's like being mixed within sort of like through English as kind of just like this like middle ground language, which is very interesting, I think, just because it takes I think for sort of like my generation of like just coming here when we were like 6 years old, like we pick up sort of the language much more quickly, and like Nepali becomes kind of a bit more like strange for us, I think. We become like, there's more gaps and more distance between us, and so I think English kind of becomes like this anchoring like basic language, which we then can kind of like use as like different mediums to kind of like understand our Nepali experience, which is in itself is like so ironic, like using English to understand our Nepali way. And I think that's kind of like what I feel is like being done in my poetry. And also there's also a difference between kind of like, I guess, what people might consider like high art like language, you know, so to speak, like academic English or like academic language, which exists also in Nepali, because I don't have access to sort of academic Nepali, whereas like in English I have access to like academic English, whereas like other sort of like, you know, groups or the other sort of youth might not have the same level of access to like, you know, English academic speak. And so I think there is like this interesting sort of like juxtaposition between the two, that I think there's always kind of that friction, which is like a difficulty, especially for sort of young writers and young writers and young like creatives. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Mukahang. So we should have an opportunity to hear some of your poetry a little bit later on. Thanks. I just want to switch back to Sanjay, but before I do that, like a reminder, audience, that you can ask questions. Please just type them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them. So yeah, please do ask questions. Sanjay, as we said earlier, we know that you know, there's a sense that particularly certain kinds of Gurkha women were kind of hidden, being, you know, restricted to the domestic sphere, unlike their men, mostly due to the, you know, limited knowledge of English. But do you have examples of you know, these so-called hidden women being able to express themselves, you know, artistically, culturally in the UK? I mean, apart from, you know, the obvious community-based you know, events where you have Nepali dance, Nepali singing, this and that, do you know of you know, women who have written in English or Nepali in the UK? And you know, I think there was a particular example of Memoirs of a Gurkha Wife during lockdown, which we did an interview with some time ago. Are there examples like this? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Are there women working in other languages, such as Mukahang Limbu Magarai, for example?
Right. Thank you. That's an interesting question, but sadly the literary community is very backward, and that's where one of the key reasons is because most of the women I talk to are, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't have formal education, right? They're not able to write the way you and I are talking about. But Memoirs of a Gurkha Wife during lockdown is one key example of how women are expressing themselves. In this case, in the English language. So Leela Selimbabu is the author of the memoir, where she talks about her own, because it's a memoir, she talks about her own everyday life during lockdown, but she goes back in retrospect when her husband was away fighting in Iran. So she draws parallel between her life during lockdown and when her husband was in Iraq. The kind of uncertainty that she had during both times, right? She has also been writing in Nepali language. You know, there are other people who write in the Nepali language because English is probably second or third language to them. So writing in Nepali is easier. But if you talk about younger generation, they are more expressive in both written and other artistic forms. For example, Mukahang being one of them, right? But one of the key things that have happened recently is the Gurkha women being able to express themselves through social media, for example, TikTok, right, where they do not just showcase their cultural side, but also show their artistic side mixed with their tradition, right? The kind of dances they do, the kind of attires they wear, is a marker of the heritage that they carry, the experience that they have brought throughout their travels from Nepal to Hong Kong, Singapore, and now finally to the UK, right? So all these experiences that these older women have are expressed. I don't know if the identifier for artistic would be applicable here, but if you look at the TikToks that these women make, they are profound. They have a lot of research material in there. Yeah.
Thanks, Sanjay. Yeah. So I mean, you make a good point there. I mean, what is artistic? We don't want to like place an arbitrary kind of line between what constitutes art and what's, high art, low art, that sort of thing. But yeah, also, I mean, in terms of, these older women, obviously there's these ongoing issues, concerns on the part of the older generation that the younger generation is, not able to speak various languages to the same extent. They may be speaking English much better than they did, the kids maybe, but maybe they're not speaking Nepali. Certainly, they may not be speaking Guru or other ethnic languages. How do you think that is there a very obvious sense in which these Gurkha women would contribute towards the younger generation, holding on to Nepali languages and keeping them connected with their heritage? Sanjay, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer that. It's a difficult question. So probably a critical take I have on myself and a bunch of youth I work with and my friends is when we work with the older generation of Gurkha women in the UK, we generally tend to see them only as receivers. So when we work with them, we generally tend to teach them English or teach them the way of life in the UK. We have never thought of working with these women in a mutual exchange kind of manner where we can learn a lot of things from them. For instance, language being one, the kind of culture that they have been exposed to. We can be critical of the culture as well, but it is important to learn the culture they have been born and raised in, and the kind of the histories that they have, right? So whenever I talk to people, generally they are like trying to intervene in these women's lives as these women are only receivers. So I think using kind of feminist approach, maybe, which I generally do, trying to break the hierarchy, trying to dismantle the power relationship that exists between people who know certain languages. I think that would help a lot. In the sense that if we tell the women or the older women that there is something that they can give us as well, while we can also give them something in return, probably an exchange in language, for instance, then I think the relationship is more powerful then. One of the things that I've noticed is because as Mukahang and Premila earlier discussed, the younger generation of the Gurkhas are moving towards Indians, and there's a disconnect between the older generation of Gurkha men and women who have limited English knowledge, while the younger generation have limited Nepali language. So the disconnect is growing, as per my understanding, and I think through writings, through literature, even through TikTok, social media, we can bridge the gap that is increasing in the recent days.
Great, thanks, Sanjay. So yeah, certainly. I mean, none of us would probably think of our mothers as just receivers because they give us so much, right? So, I mean, Mukahang, reading through your collection, Mother of Flip-Flops, it's so clear to me that you're not just reaching out to your Nepali inheritance, your heritage, but you're also reaching out to your mother in so many ways, and to your childhood. Maybe you could read one of your poems. Would this be a good time?
Yeah, I can read this poem I read actually when I was in Singapore, working on a similar project to what Sanjay is doing, as like kind of like transcribing sort of like Nepali Gurkha wives' experiences, but like through sort of like creative means and essays. And this was just a poem about some like Gurkhas I noticed at a food stall. And it's called Makan Sutra Glashan's Bay, which is like the area of food stall. So Makan Sutra Glashan's Bay. Two Gurkhas are led food stall to food stall in this fish sauce heat, smart shirts tucked tight like a closed mouth. The Nepali way of walking tastes different to the nutty satay on my tongue. It's unlike my tart pink drink, but rather tastes of Dettol soap, sweat, and a little bit of pre-cum. My almost retired sniper uncle points them out as fresh because we see the jilly-milly flash across their eyes, how their brown faces sweaty, soak in this foreign humidity, and their newly enlisted bodies are awake like cicadas in the bushes. At first, you keep looking, because everything is so glittering. I think I saw the skinnier one on Grindr, though it could have been another trooper with a buzz cut, another thick-bushed profile with a bio, a man who is not scared to try anything under the sun that does not kill me. How often does he let another man bring him to a little death until a Gurkha becomes afraid of dying? I don't want to turn these soldiers into metaphors for bravery, manhood, migration, or symbols of hardship so hard it makes your nails go black. Are they fools or heroes running 2.4 kilometers under 9 minutes and 45 seconds? I'm trying hard now not to imagine these two beer-bellied after 20 years of service, still smiling like the village idiot, eating stingray for breakfast, guarding the King Jong-uns, containing terror at home as Eastern fathers might, well-meaning, semi-non-verbal fathers. It's best to deny them such poesy. And right, they're not yet thick-hipped wives. They're fat, happy, broken ability children, and simply leave them to this heat with the food in their hands they don't know the names of.
Thanks, Mukahang. It's great. Yes. Really interesting mix of bits and pieces of Nepali scattered in there, which I enjoy. The limited flash is nice. So yeah, in your chapbook in Mother of Flip-Flops, there's a particular poem which talks about this inheritance, or your inheritance, and there's a line that goes, "Nepalese writing you can no longer read." So without wanting to, I'm not trying to guilt trip you live, but I mean, is there a kind of a regret here, or a guilt that you're separated from your cultural inheritance by being here in the UK, or do you just feel comfortable, leaning into it and drawing that out into your poetry?
I think that what was really interesting about that question is the fact that, like, I think, what I think you picked up on was like this feeling of like guilt and regret, which I think sort of looking back and growing up, I do feel that sort of like level of kind of I guess like just regret on not being able to like sustain my Nepalese. And like I was thinking of last time I was conscious of being able to read Nepalese, and which is like when I was like when I like came home and my like a father had like written like a little note in Nepali on the table when I was like 7 or 8, and that was the last time I was able to kind of like use that skill, and now it's been forgotten. But I think one of the things I guess like is growing up is like actually I never quite felt guilty like about like forgetting Nepali. Like nobody ever made me feel guilty, and like guilt is like a perennial guilt is like sort of like manifestations from sort of external bodies. Like somebody has to say like, oh, you should feel guilty about this for you to actually like be conscious of like, oh, should I feel guilty about this thing? And I think that's where sort of like and that's where kind of like that, like, you know, sort of like the tension is that like I was never made to feel guilty by sort of like my Nepali family. So like none of them said like, oh, you can't read or write Nepalese, like, so, you know, like they didn't sort of like make a huge issue of it. However, my teachers who were white were like, how can you not, like, you know, how could you sort of like let that sort of part of yourself go? Which was like, I think, such a dichotomy in that sense, because I think for us, especially for the generation, sort of our generation, like our parents do the work of getting us there, and they want us to assimilate as best as possible for survival, to sort of like achieve the things that they aren't able to. And so in that aspect, they kind of like do, like, I guess not every family is like this, but do sort of like neglect kind of like that, you know, that sort of like preservation of Nepali culture, or like, or maybe like mainly just language, versus kind of just like saying it's okay to learn English. It's okay for, you know, English to be kind of like the main sort of like linguistic tool for you. And so that's why I think, yeah, that's where like that poem also comes from. It's like I'm leaning into, as you said, like that fact that actually it's just a fact now. I can't read, you know, Nepali. Yeah.
Sanjay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it's interesting how Mukahang is talking about his teachers telling him how things get about the Nepali inheritance, especially with language, and then the Limbu inheritance, the Limbu language that she as is not even talked about in these spaces, right? Just wanted to add in here.
Yeah, so I mean, it's I think we all, those of us who have lived abroad, lived outside of Nepal, Nepali origin people, have, you know, certain bouts of guilt for sure about how we are away from home, and in that sense away from our cultures, away from our families, away from our languages, because things never stay the same. You're always kind of negotiating your own position between cultures. So we have a comment here which indicates, which says, your experiences seem similar to other migrant groups in the UK, where younger generations understand English better than older generations, and older generations understand their languages better. And this participant has also expressed surprise that Farnborough is mentioned in a modern urban rap song, but there you go. So I mean, I also wanted to ask briefly, Mukahang, whether you feel as a poet that your experience of creating poetry is do you find that it's similar to that of other diaspora youth? It's not unique to Nepali origin individuals in the UK, obviously. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think in the sense that not that there aren't many sort of, actually like that's fact, there aren't like many Nepali sort of like poets in the UK. I think that's partially like to do with, I think it's just our level of education when we sort of like brought to the UK. Like, so I guess for my generation, I was very lucky that like I was able to kind of just like do well in school and like kind of like keep that going. Whereas I think people who come here a bit older, so around when they come here like late teens, like 16, 17, that becomes a transitional period, which is really difficult for them because they're like, oh, like they're like stuck in this like, you know, state where they're able to like, where they aren't able to sort of like, you know, like absorb like the sort of the new sort of like culture so easily and quickly, when they're still kind of like, you know, like hanging on to like their cultures like from like back in Nepal, and so they aren't able to sort of like, I guess, like reach their like full potential. And so I think a lot of like the up and coming sort of like as Nepali diaspora like poetry community is like actually just like based more in Nepal. So I know like Word Warriors, which is like you worked with, we don't actually have a like a specific Nepali sort of like collective. Whereas like if you look at sort of like there are kind of like South Asian diaspora like poetry communities. So like Zindabad magazine, which is sort of like we you know, was like a sort of a zine created for like South Asian poets. And so I think we kind of, there isn't sort of like a focalized Nepali, even within Nepali, you know, you have like, as you said, like Sanjay, like Limbus and like Tapas and Gurungs, even like, you know, but we're so like diluted in the sense that like we belong in the South Asian sort of diaspora community. And although our experiences are different, and of course there are always going to be similarities between sort of like different kind of like groups and like how you experience things. I think ours is unique in a sense as well because of like our Gurkha heritage, because of the history, and that level of kind of like, actually not everybody who comes, I think, or the majority, especially like my mother's generation especially, are kind of like, you know, illiteracy is not talked about. There's so much shame behind like the generation before us in terms of like being illiterate. You know, you go to like a certain shop and you might not be able to order the food you want, and you know, there's like such like guilt and shame and embarrassment about that. And I think that kind of is like a generational thing. And sorry, and I just wanted to add, like, this is kind of also like to all the sort of the people who are like participating, an open call to sort of creating this like poetry community. So if you do want to kind of like be part of like this Nepali kind of like collective, please like send your like emails to like Rabi or me, and hopefully we can create this like specific group in the UK, which will like help us kind of like cultivate and bring our like voices to the front and just like have more kind of like conversations with one another.
Yeah, thanks, Mukahang. So we already seem to have a request to read your poetry at the Nepalese Community Centre in Aldershot, BCC, UK. So let's follow up on that later. Premila?
Yeah, just to focus on Mukahang again, I just wanted to ask, sorry, just your relationship with the Limbu language. About that, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was actually going to respond to Sanjay, but I was like, oh, I'm taking up so much time by rambling so much. But like, I think, yeah, there is kind of like, I think there's so many layers. So like, it's like, if currently like Nepali is like one generation away from me, then like the Limbu is like even like 2 generations away from me, in the sense that like not even my parents speak Limbu very well. They understand it, but they don't really speak it, and my grandparents speak it, and it's not something, I think, within actually just in the sort of like the Limbu sort of like, like groups, like they don't really like pass that down too much either. Like they, like my parents understand it, but they're not able to converse with it. Actually, a funny anecdote is like my grandparents would always switch to Limbu if we're in the room, they're talking to me, and they'd always switch to like Limbu language to like speak about me, and I'd be like, I'm here, like I'm standing right here, I know you're talking about me, by like code switching into this sort of like secret Limbu language. And so I think that's kind of like so that's why I feel like it's even more further away from me. And I don't know, there is a sadness about like not being able to, I don't know if I even have the capabilities right now to like pick up that language. So I think there is like such a difficulty about that. Yeah, I don't know if sorry if that answers your question.
Premila, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, well, there's a few things I want to ask you. I don't know if we'll have time for it, but it kind of goes along with our with the question that we have coming in here about how the Nepali language and how does the Nepali language and its speakers, this is from Anil Pradhan, how does the Nepali language and its speakers in the UK negotiate with the specific masculinity construct of the Gurkha as a martial race, specifically when it comes to the voices and expressions vis-a-vis non-heteronormative gender and sexuality contexts? There's a heavy question right there. I was wondering whether we'd have time to get into the whole bravery thing, but here we are. So just in relation to, say, Gorkhali grime, where this idea of bravery and adversity as demonstrated by Gurkha soldiers kind of, seems to fit with the real or imagined gangland lives of Gurkha youth in British towns, right? But how does this, we see that we saw a bit of that in some of the clips, though not all. But I mean, this may be satisfactory to many young Gurkha males living in the UK, but how about young Nepali origin women? Do they also engage in this fiction? I mean, I'm calling it a fiction, take that as you will, but I mean, do they also express themselves in other musical genres or other art forms? Premila?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the masculinity is a very important question and a factor to think about the sort of art expressions, right? So, yeah, as we pointed out, the idea of the martial race is something that people start internalizing, but that is also to do with young men and very heteronormative. So, their music will always be tends to be about bravery or, and this fantasy. And it kind of mixes well with the idea of gang culture and bravery as well. Whereas with the women, they don't have that sort of music. I mean, there is one female rapper, but she moved from Nepal. Well, she moved from Nepal to Essex, and then to Belgium, and now back to Nepal. And, Nepalese female rappers, they tend to try and take on this bravado, but they don't internalize the martial race. It's more about like female empowerment subjects. But usually the way that women express themselves musically will be often to do with love songs or parental problems, relationship issues, rather than fantasies about being drug dealers or, gangsters and just anything brave or warriors. They tend to stay away from those subjects.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's interesting because we have Anusha Limbu saying hello to us, and she found out about the panels for Premila. She's doing some research and she's doing some freelance writing about the new Gurkha warrior film, which I was actually thinking about mentioning because that's one of the few things I've seen. I'm assuming she's referring to the 2021 movie Gurkha Beneath the Bravery, which is, seems to be totally buying into this idea of, if a man says he's not afraid of dying, he's either lying or he's a Gurkha kind of thing. I mean, do we have any responses to that from any of the panelists? Sanjay?
Yeah. So one of the things that is often highlighted when I talk to people about that, so I'm not talking about the Gurkha men, the retired soldiers. When they talk about their past lives, they often tend to glorify how they as soldiers did this and that. But then if you go underneath the nuances of the wars they were involved in, then you'd often end up both crying, the person who's talking about the war, and then myself, when both end up crying when they explain about the people who were dead during the war, the friends who died during the war, the people whom they killed during the war. Right? During when the bullets were being fired, probably they're taken away by the moment. But then when they reflect about it now, then there's a sense of guilt for killing and being killed, right? So the aspect of bravery is there, which they do not completely discard. But then there's also the human aspect that is often neglected when the Gurkhas are talked about. Gurkhas are often portrayed as these warriors, heartless warriors, for instance. But then their emotions are not talked about. The psychological trauma that they went through during the war years, that is not talked about. And I think there is a niche that we as youngsters can write about, can research about, probably portray it through art, through movies, and then make the larger mass aware about what these men have gone through. And then there's another layer of women, which I can talk about for the next hour. When the men were at war, these women were separated, and the emotionality that they had to go through, the emotional trauma that they had to go through. But I'll stop here. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to sort of ask Premila about just actually the notion of bravery and how actually why are they why is the bravery, as you put it, in sort of things like gang violence and sort of drug dealing and those kind of activities, when there's I guess a contrast between being a soldier. I mean yes, there's so many sort of more complexities about being a soldier and being brave, but why is that so more resonant for the youth, do you think?
It's an interesting idea, this idea of bravery. It's a good question. I mean, there's this kind of wanting to make your parents proud, make your dad proud. There's this kind of internalization that I see generationally, because it's such a revered idea that, okay, Gurkhas are brave for generations, so therefore I have to also be brave. I mean, I'm not quite sure, it's more a masculinity thing, because often in subcultures, older subculture studies, when they look at things like, especially in musical subcultures, often the youth is about terms of rebellion, right? So if you're going to be, even if you're not a drug dealer, but if you're going to be rapping or pretending to be a drug dealer, it's just a way to piss off your parents. But in the Gurkha context, it's a little bit different. It's not so much about rebellion, but more about ways to internalize bravery and also connect with whatever is trending and cool around you, So,
that's quite curious, isn't it? Phenomenon. But Premila, I really wanted to, before, because we're rapidly running out of time, I really wanted to touch quickly on this idea of Romanized Nepali that we spoke about earlier. Maybe you can give us a quick overview of what this meant. But I also wanted to add, so this idea that Gurkha soldiers were kind of compelled to communicate with their superiors in Romanized Nepali, and also how would this relate to younger people today, in younger Nepalis in the UK today who may not know the Nepali script? Would this be some way for them to kind of like be more Nepali by expressing themselves in Nepali?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So Romanized Nepali is basically Nepali, but written in, the English alphabet or Roman script. And, there's kind of like two gaps. So one is the thing that Gurkha veterans back in the day, they were not taught Nepalese. So, they were recruited very young as teenagers, often underage, although they pretended to be 18. And they didn't really have that much education to begin with, often coming from rural areas. Then when they were in the army, they were told to write in Roman script. So the elders themselves cannot read or write Nepali very well, and that was their form of communication. Now, skip 2 generations, because their children were then able to, go to school, and then their children's children often, now in the UK, not also knowing Nepali scripts, they're using Romanized Nepali. I wonder whether it's going to be an interesting bridge of communication between this kind of the elderly pensioner generation, the grandparents and the children. And it's also very important because in terms of services in Britain, whether it's accessing the NHS, I've often had elders say, I can't read this Nepali translation, but if it was written in Roman Nepali, I'd be able to read it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we're pretty much out of time now. So I think we have a quick shout out from a participant called Doug Walters, who's generally commending Gurkhas in the UK, and please enjoy the panel as well in all this complexity. So I'd like to thank Premila, Sanjay, and Mukahang for your contributions. It's been really, really interesting. For the questions as well from our participants, I hope you enjoyed this session. I'd also like to once more thank the National Centre for Writing for hosting this panel, under the Visible Communities Programme. Special thank you to Kate Griffin and Martin Waters, who helped set up this particular panel. So on that note, wish you all a happy Dasai again, and go and enjoy. Cheers.
Thank you. Happy Dasai.
Thank you, everyone.